Currently, GMD Blue is making a video on the LEGO Star Wars iceberg charts that I made for the games. And as you can probably guess, one of the entries at the top are characters who appear in Complete Saga but didn't make it to Skywalker Saga. Now, I've been helping out doing some research and giving info on unclear entries when it's needed, and one of the things that I did was make a list of what I believe is every character who was in Complete Saga but didn't appear in Skywalker. That is just including ships and extra toggle, just because that's its own whole entire can of worms. But anyway, while I imagine that video will probably be going over this entry more briefly, just giving a rundown on everybody who didn't appear and moving on without going too in depth, that makes sense because, you don't want to make this 5-hour beast to edit and stay too long on one entry when there's this whole entire other chart to get through. But I found the topic interesting enough where I just wanted to simply talk about my own before that's even out and, give some further details, kind of as a way to hype it up almost, but really I just found this interesting enough to want to explore on my own. And while everybody knows about characters like Imperial Spy and such, I'm not going to go over that on this piece. Again, everybody's talked about them. I'm here to talk about some real weirdos that have hardly been highlighted, if at all. Now, I'm going to start with one that I have seen people point out, but it helps set up kind of what the whole entire theme of this video would be, and those are the regular old Rebel Troopers. Now, these characters do appear in Skywalker Saga as NPCs, however, you cannot play as them for whatever reason, and yet people have been bothered by this. So, this kind of sets up what this video is going to be like, which is that there are generic, nameless characters that just kind of represent a whole entire group that were playable in Complete Saga, but not in Skywalker Saga. But weirdly, that kind of mostly just goes for the quote-unquote good side of the characters. The villains have all the generic stormtroopers and everything. You can play as those guys in Skywalker Saga, but for whatever reason, the other side, they just kind of skimmed out and made them NPCs only at most. And that continues with Bespin Guard. You see, Bespin Guard is the regular old dude from Cloud City with, the blue outfit. And this guy was actually a bit famous because his death scream was a meme for a while, among others. But yeah, despite the belovedness, there is no trace of them in Skywalker Saga. In fact, I don't think they even appear as an NPC in there, and I think there was some guy in the movie who probably looked like this, but I'm not 100% on that. But yeah, they are totally absent from Skywalker Saga, and, rest in peace for that. At least you can play as the ice cream maker guy. Skywalker Saga has pretty much every glub shido from the original trilogy under the sun, which makes the absence of characters like these, and again, especially ones like Imperial Spy, all the more weird. Now, moving on is that the Royal Guards from Episode 1 are not playable either. Again, I'm pretty sure they appear as NPCs in Skywalker Saga, but you cannot play as them while you could in Complete Saga. And you probably remember them as having to be rescued in that one level. And, moving on through that is actually a character that is on the villain sides that weirdly is fitting. This is the Palace Guards from Jabba. The ones with the helmets specifically, I'm pretty sure that they, for whatever reason, are not in Skywalker Saga, the ones that Lando disguised himself as. So, yeah, that's a more kind of weird exclusion on the other side. And moving on with that is that generic Ewoks, Wicket is playable in Skywalker Saga, and I think he's the only Ewok who's playable in Skywalker Saga. Generic Ewoks appear as NPCs, but again, you cannot play as just any old other Ewok in Skywalker Saga. And before I kind of get to the last few weirdest ones, just real quick, I do want to point out that PK Droid, for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure is not playable in Skywalker Saga, and that's weird because they seem to have, every other regular old legged droid in there, obviously Gonk, and I think they even have the mouse droid playable in there, so yeah, that's strange. Now, the two weirdest generic good guys, and I'm going to start with the more interesting one, that's Rebel Pilot. just a generic old rebel pilot, no one in particular. So this character is unique because I'm pretty sure that they weren't in the original LEGO Star Wars 1 or 2, but were newly added as playable to complete Saga because they weirdly appear towards the end of the character select screen. And I'm pretty sure this guy just appears in the opening cutscene to Episode 5, and you can see that they've got a blue helmet that's unique, probably to differentiate from Luke, I'm guessing. And yeah, they're just kind of a weird, unique, generic rebel pilot who's nobody in particular, but they're there, they're playable, and, you know, they're not in Skywalker Saga. There's probably generic NPCs, but you don't get to play as them. But this might be more so of a case that they were replaced by specific characters rather than excluded, because Skywalker Saga lets you play as the specifically named pilots who help destroy the Death Star at the end of A New Hope, and those guys are some of the most beloved glub shittos out there, so yeah, that makes sense. And then also, in the original games, there was just the generic old Wookiee. No one in particular, just Wookiee. And again, Skywalker Saga, blah blah, NPCs appears to this, however, this is more so a case of them kind of being replaced by a specifically named character. But Wookiee and Rebel Pilot are still technically missing if you want, like, split hairs. And Wookiee is also weird because I feel like that since Wookiee appears in the level where you play as Yoda and Chewbacca in Complete Saga and 1, maybe they did want to have the specifically named Wookiees, but they possibly just didn't have the name yet, because LEGO Star Wars 1, that game was done and out while the movie Episode 3 was still in production and was not out yet. And that leads to the last character who I want to bring up, who understandably isn't in Skywalker Saga, but is still kind of sad, is the disguised clones. These guys appear as enemies and are playable in LEGO Star Wars 1. And these guys are unique because they're not in the movie. They are from a scene that was cut from the final movie, but they still made it into the game because, again, it was done while that movie wasn't even out yet, so they thought they were going to be in the final take of the film. So yeah, these guys are still just there as a interesting leftover remnant, and of course they're in 2 and Complete Saga 2 just because those brought everybody back from the previous game. Skywalker Saga, they're absent, as said, which is sad because they could have been a cool, like, addition as, like, a nod to this, but at least we've got the, like, original prototype version of Luke, that's the Star Killer. But yeah, anyway, I'm done rambling. Be sure to check out the iceberg once GMT Blue is finished with it. I'll, of course, announce that when it's done.